The third quarter was supposed to be basketball. Instead, it turned into a circus where whistles dictated everything, and chaos masqueraded as playoff intensity. At least the officials called one thing correctly when A'ja Wilson leveled Lexie Hull with another bone-crushing screen, the kind she had been setting all series. But even then, it didn't feel like fairness. Wilson had done the same thing 5 times in Game 1, without consequence, and this time when a whistle finally went against her, Becky Hammon exploded like she'd been cheated out of the entire season. 15 straight calls could have gone Vegas's way, and if one tilted the other direction, she screamed, waved her arms, and worked the officials as if injustice had struck her dynasty. That's what makes this story so maddening. It wasn't that Indiana lacked talent. It wasn't that they couldn't match the Aces punch for punch. It was that the game slipped away on officiating that left the Fever climbing uphill through a blizzard of whistles. 40-1 fouls. Let that number settle. 16 of them in just the third quarter. That's not basketball. That's an interruption festival dressed up as playoff grit. Indiana players were tossed to the ground, shoved off their spots, and every time they tried to build rhythm, the game froze. Lexie Hull, already battling a back injury from Game 1, was targeted on every possession, shoved into screens, knocked flat, and still called for fouls when she fought to stand her ground. And through all of this, Wilson somehow walked off the floor, celebrated for her stat line, 25 points, 9 rebounds, 5 steals, 2 blocks. Though numbers told the whole story. Lost in the headlines was that Hull tied a Fever playoff record by hitting 5 threes, pushing through visible pain while dragging her team back into the fight. This wasn't basketball. It was survival, and Indiana refused to die quietly. What makes the outcome even more infuriating is that Indiana had already proven they could beat Vegas cleanly. Game 1 wasn't just a fluke, it was domination. They walked into Las Vegas, the 2-time defending champions' home court, on the very night Wilson was crowned MVP, and dismantled them by 16 points. Kelsey Mitchell was unstoppable, pouring in 34 points with an ease that silenced every critic. She scored off the dribble, beyond the arc, at the rim, and the Fever never let Vegas dictate tempo. Aaliyah Boston locked down the paint, making Wilson work for every look, while Odyssey Sims and Lexie Hull turned defense into transition buckets. The Fever weren't lucky. They were disciplined, poised, and flat-out better. And that's what made the whistle in Game 2 sting even more, because without it, the same poised Indiana squad might have gone home with a commanding 2-0 series lead. Instead, the Aces leaned on chaos. From the opening minutes of Game 2, it wasn't about clean execution. It was about bodies colliding, arm swinging, and officials who never set a tone. Illegal screens became routine. Off-ball wrestling matches disguised as box-outs went uncalled. Fever players ended up sprawled on the hardwood, yet whistles only seemed to blow when it benefited Vegas. Stephanie White said it best. It's hard for us to find flow when there's a foul called every 10 seconds. When they're at the free throw line, we can't get up and down the floor. Her words summed it up. Offense requires rhythm, timing, spacing, and all of that vanished when the whistle cut every possession into fragments. For Hull, it was a nightmare scenario. She admitted before the game that her back was sore, that she'd spent hours with trainers just trying to be cleared to play. Most players would sit. She suited up, strapped herself into treatment tape, and absorbed punishment. Vegas knew she was hurting, and they went after her. Yet instead of folding, she hit 5 threes and kept the Fever alive. Every shot was a refusal to surrender, a message that Indiana would not be bullied into silence. That's what playoff basketball is supposed to be about: willpower trumping adversity. But when 4 fouls were called in a row against Indiana during a critical stretch, erasing momentum that had cut the lead to single digits, you could feel the game tilt away. Fans watching at home screamed at their televisions. How could 4 consecutive possessions all swing the same way? How could Howard get hammered under the rim with no whistle, while the slightest contact on Wilson stopped play immediately? National coverage didn't tell that story. Instead, it framed Wilson as dominant. Sure, on paper, but dominant isn't the same as fair. Aaliyah Boston was shoved on rebounds, hacked on post-ups, and still pulled down 13 boards like her life depended on it. Odyssey Sims scored 18 by weaving through defenders who treated her drives like target practice, slapping and grabbing at her arms. Yet their grit went overlooked. The narrative was that Wilson showed why she's MVP. That's convenient, but it erases context. She wasn't just scoring, she was scoring on whistles, free throws, and mismatches created by officials too hesitant to call the game evenly. Then there was Mitchell. After exploding for 34 in Game 1, she was locked down to just 13. That didn't happen by chance. Vegas smothered her with double teams, face-guarded her when she didn't have the ball, and turned every cut into a collision. Mitchell looked less like a scorer and more like a pinball machine, bouncing off defenders with no freedom of movement. That was the Aces' biggest adjustment: take Mitchell out at all costs, and with officials allowing physical chaos. It worked. Without her rhythm, Indiana was forced to rely on Hull's threes and Sims's drives, pieces of an offense that could punch but not sustain. Even Becky Hammon admitted afterward that the game was too physical, a remarkable statement given her team benefited most from the whistles. That detail reveals just how far things had spun. This wasn't strategy versus strategy. It was officiating shaping the outcome. When coaches complain about the same roughness that gave them an edge, you know balance has been lost. And yet, through all of it, the Fever never quit. Boston fought like a veteran in only her third season. Hull, taped back and limping, drilled shots that silenced a Vegas crowd. Sims willed baskets into existence out of broken plays. Indiana walked into the defending champions arena, got dragged into a brawl they didn't start, and still kept swinging. That's why this series feels different than it looks on paper. Because as it shifts back to Indianapolis, the equation changes completely. Gainbridge Fieldhouse isn't just a court. It's a storm. 17,000 fans who have been starving for playoff basketball will be on their feet, screaming at every call, every whistle, every bump that Vegas tries to get away with. The same officiating crew that let Wilson Bowl players over without consequence won't be able to hide in silence. When a deafening crowd reacts in unison, every shove on Boston will trigger an eruption. Every body check on Hull will draw fury. That's what home court does. It forces accountability. Hull herself said, "Our fans, they show up and they show out." Boston echoed her excitement, admitting the Fever feed off the noise. And why wouldn't they? At home this season, Indiana has turned double-digit deficits into comeback wins purely on atmosphere. The walls shake, the opponent buckles, and suddenly runs that were impossible on the road feel inevitable in front of their crowd. So while Vegas celebrates evening the series, they know what's coming. They know Mitchell's frustration will boil into fire when whistles aren't cutting her rhythm in half. They know Boston's boards will come with roars that echo louder than any stat line. They know Hull, bruised but unbroken, will rise for another three and set the building on fire. And this time, it won't be drowned out by Aces fans or softened by friendly officiating. It will be amplified by every person in Gainbridge who has waited years for this exact moment. Game 2 was chaos. But it didn't break Indiana. If anything, it hardened them. The Fever now have the scars, the anger, and the energy of a fan base ready to turn pain into power. Vegas can throw body. They can manipulate whistles. But in Indianapolis, every moment will be magnified. And the Fever have already shown they don't back down. Game 1 was a statement. Game 2 was survival. Game 3, that's where the series shifts from controversy to destiny. Show your support for the Fever by dropping "Let's Go, Lexie, Let's Go" in the comments. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next chapter, because this battle isn't over. It's only getting louder.